So we've talked about dealing with simplifying square roots when you've got a number in there and kind of breaking those up and how that works. And I mean, the main rule that we're looking at here for that is the idea that the square root of a times b equals the square root of a times the square root of b, meaning we can combine these, put them back together, however that goes. And if we happen to have something that, we can get a perfect square root of, then we can go ahead and take that out the other way. Now what we're going to deal with is we're going to deal specifically with variables, and we're going to start with this, the square root of x. So the square root of x, interestingly, can't do anything with it because we don't know what x is. So, if x is 4, then it's going to be 2. If x is 9, it's going to be 3. There kind of isn't a consistent rule. So here, there isn't really anything we can do. This is still just the square root of x. However, if we get the square root of x squared, remember, this is basically the square root of x times the square root of x. Well, just as we saw when we were working with the when we had something like the square root of, for example, 2 times the square root of 2, that would equal the square root of 4, which again equals 2. Now we do have to be careful about this because we come back and we go, okay, well, if this is true, right, then what we'd be looking at is the square root of x squared would basically equal the square root of, it's the square root of x times the square root of x, and so square root of x times the square root of x, which should equal x, which is generally true. But just as a really quick example here, I want to say what's going to happen. We put in 2's and that's going to work out. We put in 3's, that's going to work out. We put in 2.5, still going to work out fine. But what happens if x is -2? Well, when we go through and do this, this would say that the square root, right? We would do this. Our square root would be essentially -2 would be our answer, except that there's no way we could ever really get there. So what we actually need to realize is going through here, when we square something, right, we're going to take -2 and we're going to square it. That's going to make that -2 into a +4, right? So now we're looking at the square root of -2 squared is the square root of 4, which equals 2. So what we need to actually go back and change right here is we're going to get, because we're going to square something, no matter what, when you square something, you're going to get a positive result. We're going to get the absolute value of x. So I'm just going to write that over here so that we have the square root of x squared is going to equal the absolute value of x. Okay, now that's squared, and squared is great, and we like squared, and squared works out wonderfully. However, we are not just going to stop at squared. This is going to keep going. We have the, let's go back to blue because that's the color I'm doing these in. The square root of x to the third. And so we're going to go ahead and we're going to break these up, and we're going to look at what do we actually have here. Well, we can take this and go, we have the square root of x squared times the square root of x, right? We can kind of break it up that way. And as we saw before, the square root of x squared is the absolute value of x. And so what we're going to do, though, is it turns out that because we don't have to deal with this issue of the flip-flop of variable or the flip-flop of positive and negative signs, we don't need to worry about the absolute value. This is just the is going to be x, because that's what this becomes, times the square root of x, because there's still one we can't get rid of. Okay, so we'll put that over here, the square root. I'm going to go back here and change this so we get it right. Square root of x squared. Sorry, not the square root of x, then squared. So here we've got the square root of x to the third is, and this is going to be x times the square root of x. All right, and our last one here that we're going to, well, our last one, we're going to go through a couple more. So I'm actually going to go ahead and do a new page, and we're going to go ahead and look at this here. What we're going to do is we're going to do what happens when we have the square root of x to the fourth. Well, we can break this up pretty easily into the square root of x squared times the square root of x squared, right? We multiply those together, we get x to the fourth. Square root of x squared would be the absolute value of x each. However, because we still have an x squared in there, it can be negative, it can be positive. We haven't actually changed it yet. This just comes out to x squared. Because if x is negative, it's still going to get canceled out in here, and we're still not going to have to deal with it. So let's jump back really quick and just add this. The square root of x to the fourth is x squared. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and jump all the way up to the, well, we'll do this one as well. Square root of x to the fifth. This one, it doesn't come up as often, but square root of x to the fifth. If you go ahead and look at that, we got the square root of x squared times the square root of x squared times the square root of x, which is going to equal x squared square root of x. And then we're going to go back and we're going to deal with the 6 here. Good old x to the sixth power, because that's a thing you're going to encounter a lot in your life. X to the sixth power. We're going to break it up. We're going to have the square root of x squared times the square root of x squared times the square root of x squared. And this is where we have to come back and be careful, because we have an odd number of x squareds here. And we just need to make sure, again, these become this x squared, and then we've got the absolute value of x squared for this. So we have absolute value of x times x squared. And so what we're actually going to do is go ahead and kind of cram all of this together, and it's really the absolute value of x to the third. So just to come back to finish out our little chart here, the square root of x to the fifth is going to be x squared times the square root of x, and the square root of x to the sixth is going to be the absolute value of x to the third. So this part that I have written in yellow right here, and I'm boxing in yellow and written in purple, you should have that written down. It is in your algebra book, but this is probably something that you're going to refer back to. Hopefully I helped you understand kind of why it works that way, but you are going to have to look back at this to use it, because basically my experience is you're not going to memorize it. I'm not going to memorize it, but I can kind of reconstruct it as I go along. So make sure you have that written down for the work you're doing this week.